Thank you very much, Fabia, for a very generous introductory session, and also to Amina for yours as well. And to the whole board, really, for agreeing to let Amina invite me tonight to be part of this journey that Whisker has embarked on. I feel so proud and honored to be part of Whisker, Amina, and you know that. Because I've watched it grow like a small baby from the time it was conceptualized. And in 12 years, I'm actually quite taken with what you've done in a short space of time. You know, I mean, 12 years is actually not very long. It may sound like that, but to build an institution to the size and the scope and the impact that it's having, is really has a lot to be said for. So congratulations to Whisker for the launch of the Win3 Mentees program tonight. And also congratulations to all of you ladies for making it in what has just been described as a rigorous process that you had to go through. So it's very hard to know what to say to you, because I have a sense that you all know what it is that you want to do, because that's why you're here tonight. And that's why you've been invited or accepted into the program. And that's always a good start, to know what it is that you want. And I really think it's kind of halfway down the journey that you're embarking on. And secondly, to have understood that you need help in starting the second part of your journey to become senior managers and executives, and also to sit on company boards. In my day, I didn't know that. I wasn't quite as clear as you are about what you want to do. I sort of stumbled into most of these things that I've ended up doing. But the one consistent thing I think I can share with you is that I was driven by a passion for justice. I suppose being a South African, human rights was in my blood, because I myself was a victim of oppression, and I understood how it worked, the mechanics of it. And so I wanted to fight injustice, and that was the one thing I've always been very clear about. And to a large extent, it has shaped the direction that I've taken, because from having been a teacher when I was 23, when I finished my degree at 23 in Lesotho, I'd left South Africa because I was fed up. My parents were fed up with apartheid, and they were also thrown out in a way because they were also activists to struggle against that system. And I'd gone to Lesotho and done my degree in Lesotho and finished when I was 23. And my first job was a teacher. I taught in a boys' school, and it was quite interesting because I was young. I was a young female teacher in a boys' school, and the boys used to really take the mickey out of me sometimes. You know how boys behave. And so that was my first experience of dealing with young men, and understanding how they behave, and taking a stand that I would deal with them, but without necessarily being too harsh, because I was their teacher, and I had to find a way of dealing with them. But it taught me many lessons on tolerance, on listening, on trying to understand, and trying to be the best teacher that I could be. From there, I taught at the university for a bit, which was also fascinating. I loved teaching. I discovered I'd gone to university without being clear what I wanted to study. And I ended up studying English literature and philosophy. And I think philosophy was, for me, quite a fascinating subject, because it taught me lots of things about how one responds to the world. I then, interestingly, walked into a research job after being a teacher. I was curious about my own life. I was curious about my own background and where I came from, I knew I had, if you like, Bushman, as they call them sometimes, Bushman blood in my system, and I needed to understand what the Bushmen were all about. And so I did 3 years of research into the origins of the Bushmen as our indigenous peoples, and studying the rock art that they left behind and the meaning of the art and so on. And I think for me, those were really seminal years, because they gave me a good sense of who I am and where I come from and who my ancestors are. And I still do that. I still do that in my 70th year, because I'll be 70 in August. So, so what I'm really saying is that in your growth, remember, you also need to develop yourself, not just from a career perspective, but understanding who you are, who your ancestors are. I found that absolutely incredible work that led to what I call my own self-mastery. So, so I lived in Lesotho for 13 years after having just gone there to be a student. And in 1983, I got married. I had all my children there, and Lesotho was a hiding place for us. But they welcomed us as South Africans in exile. But at some stage, we knew we had to leave. So off we went to England with my 3 kids in 1983. And I chose, when I went there, to go and study English language, even though I was an English literature major. And the reason I chose English language, because I knew we had to stay there for at least 10 years. South Africa was not going to be free, and we didn't know how long that we were going to be there for. But I needed to do something that would give me a job in the UK. And it was at a time when teaching English as a second language was quite popular. Everybody wanted to speak English. So I went to Essex University and did my master's degree. And whilst I was studying, I applied for a job, and I landed a job on the 30th of June, 1983, teaching English as a second language in a college in West London. Got the job, came back home, picked up the family, went back to the UK to start literally 2 months later after I graduated. So that uprooting out of South Africa into Britain and England was just one of the most traumatic things that ever happened to me, but I had to survive. So this really is about obstacles that one has to face when one, as we live our lives. Totally unplanned for, totally determined by politics in our country, and having to swim with the tide. And again, these are experiences that I really feel shaped the person that I am. Because in the end, I still, for the 10 years that we lived in England, most of the work I did was related to dealing with social injustice, dealing with racism in the UK, dealing with sexism, working at the London Lighthouse for people living with HIV and AIDS. HIV and AIDS had just started when I was in the UK. I learned so much about sexuality and drug abuse, because many people were living with AIDS. Also were users of injection. They injected themselves with heroin. And you had to work in that environment where you basically supported people who you didn't really necessarily agree with the way in which they lived their lives. But that learning was so important. I had to unlearn all my prejudices during that period I was in the UK. But I will always be thankful for things that you have to do that you haven't planned, but that change your life in a positive way, because they make you more human. I became a human being who was accepting of difference. And so diversity and difference is absolutely central to the way I try to live my life and understand people by putting myself in their shoes through empathy. And I think if you're moving into that space in companies, that understanding of diversity is so important, because it gives you tools to have the conversations that you have to have in the workplace. In South Africa, many managers I find do not know how to talk about racism in the workplace or sexism in the workplace, because they themselves have never had to have those conversations with others. So that just the language of how do you deal with it in a senior management position becomes such a struggle. And I have mentored some of the senior managers and executives at AngloGold Ashanti, where I was on the board, to kind of help them with that conversation that I think every single manager needs to have, or needs to know how to have, with people that they work with, and from a leadership position. Yeah, so that was my experience in England, and then I came back to South Africa because I was fed up with living in England, and I wanted to come home, and I managed to get a job as a director of a non-governmental organization called World University Service. Plunged me into it, and I worked for it for 3 years. That's the first time I think I was very clear that I would only work in an NGO for 3 years, because I understood the limitations, and I wanted to do more than that. So I worked, and what we did largely was raise money from people abroad, mainly the Swiss, the Nordic countries, to rehabilitate all our political prisoners who were coming out of exile and out of Robben Island, to find them jobs in the environment in Cape Town, and to also teach literacy, support literacy projects, because so many South Africans were totally illiterate because of the neglect of the previous government. But that then brought me into the realm of politics, and I ended up 3 years later working for Parliament as head of transformation and democratization, where again my focus was very political in Parliament, working for the legislature. I had a very I was reporting to the speaker at the time, and she was a very feisty Indian woman who taught me so much, because she was awkward, she was difficult, but she was razor sharp, and how she would teach you was to ask you questions that were very difficult and get you to solve problems. So that was really quite an interesting time in my life as well. Again, leading from the front to try and transform the institution. We did a lot of work to transform Parliament and turn it into a people's organization rather than a legislature which was disconnected from the citizens. Yes, and so my life became very interesting after that. A few years later, I was asked to be ambassador. I went to Switzerland. I knew very little about diplomacy, but I was driven by my passion for justice, and I understood our politics very well in South Africa. So really being an ambassador was just common sense in many ways, because it needed certain values that I had been built, and it also needed an understanding of others living in foreign countries, which I had done. And that's how I ended up at the United Nations, when my government asked me to sit on the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which I served on for 12 years. So as you can see, there was nothing planned. Somehow the universe just took me into spaces that fitted me, that I also fitted with. And so to come back to the mentorship thing, I think that it's very important to know what you want. But life will not always turn out to be the way you'd like it to be. And the challenge here is, how do you then retrofit yourself and retrofit the situation that you find yourself in? Because at the end of the day, you have skills, you have knowledge, you have the right attitude, you know who you are, and you can actually, you can do most things, including sitting on a board or sitting in a senior management. I mean, MTN, when I first met Amina, was in MTN in 2010, 2007. And the reason I went to MTN was because I'd never worked in the private sector prior to that, except as a consultant. And I thought, okay, I'm 57 years old, I'll take this job and experience what it's like to work in the private sector. I must say I didn't like it. I thought it was too rigid. I thought it was so driven by profit. It wasn't clear of its purpose always. people knew very little about the public sector. People knew very little about gender equality. People knew very little about how to bring their knowledge of the environment, political environment that they lived in was very limited. And so what I chose to do at MTN was to bring that part into the workplace and literally use my own strengths to shape the job that I was in. And so again, you all sound like you've had quite a long experience in your institutions, and I think bring that with you to these new positions that you want. Do not leave them behind, and also bring all of you to it. Don't just bring a little bit of yourself to it. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to fight for that, because here in South Africa, because of our racist past, we often have to leave our blackness behind and behave as if, you know, we're not black women. We often have to leave our struggle years behind in order to make it in the private sector. So in Nigeria, it'll be different because you don't have the kind of challenges that we have. I'm sure there are gender issues, but the race issues will not be the same as we have here. So really, my inspiration to you tonight is to say, really congratulations for being clear about what you want. It will not necessarily be the way you envisage it, the way you wish it to be. Whisker will have given you all kinds of tools through the program, the 3-month program. You can take what's good from there, or what doesn't work for you. You can also choose to perhaps use it in a way that you decide. You've got amazing people like Amina and her team, and the women who will be your mentors. And knowing Amina, she will have chosen the best people for you. And just take it as it comes, you know, go with the flow, as we say. Be sensitive to processes. Be alert to the fact that there'll be resistance for some of the changes that you'd like to make. But I think the strength in your own self, make sure that you have an army of people behind you to kind of help you along wherever you want to go. And with the board positions, you know, boards can be very powerful. One person can make a huge difference in the boards. It's not always easy. Give yourself a voice, be loud, say what you mean what you say. Do not shut yourselves up in boards. Sometimes the men can be very intimidating, but you know, you don't have to be a man to be effective in those boards. You can remain feminine and beautiful and be yourself. And I think that's where you gain respect. There is a way of challenging without being rude, without being offensive, but just making your point based on what you believe in and based on the research that you've done, based on factual information, based on data that you've presented for yourself. But at least have a purpose. Know why you're working for a company. Know what you want to achieve, how you want to develop the company, to have a purpose, not just the supremacy of profit. Because I think once you look only at the profit elements of working in a company, you can get lost in that because it may just lead you in the direction that you don't want to be. I think purpose for me is everything. So congratulations, well done ladies. Wish you all the best, and I'm here, you know, I'm always going to be available. I feel so close to Whisker even though I'm far away from it. I haven't necessarily done all the things that patrons do, but when Amina calls me, I jump. And thank you once again for that.
Thank you.
We can unmute our mics and show our appreciation at this time.
Okay.
So feel free to unmute your mics and let's show.
Thank you, Mom.
Thank
you, Mom. That was quite
Thank you so much.